some House Republicans are upping the ante with what they're calling the Make Elections Great Again Act, which would go much further. One of the authors of that legislation, is Bryan Steil. He is a Republican congressman from southern Wisconsin. He also happens to be the chairman of the House Administration Committee, which has jurisdiction over elections, and he joins us now. Mr. Chairman, welcome. Okay, let's set the level here. Here are some of the provisions of the Make Elections Great Again Act. Requires photo ID to vote, and the SAVE Act requires photo ID to register. It mandates paper ballots. Mail-in ballots must be received by Election Day. It would ban the use of ranked choice voting. It would prohibit the practice called ballot harvesting, where people gather up other people's ballots to turn them in. And it would essentially abolish universal vote by mail that some states like Washington and others use. I definitely understand why Republicans like this legislation. I definitely understand. But I want you to listen to what John Thune said about 5 years ago when Democrats had their version of a bill like this.
There is absolutely zero reason to have the federal government start dictating states' election policies. And state election officials do not need Washington bureaucrats dictating how many days of early voting they should offer or how they should manage mail-in ballots.
Okay, why was that true for what Democrats wanted to do with the For the People Act, but not true about what you're doing?
I think two key things have changed. One, during the Biden administration, millions of people came into the United States illegally and undocumented, furthering the need for proof of citizenship and for photo identification. Further, we have seen a series of states take incredibly ridiculous measures and put them in place that hurt Americans' confidence in our elections. Our bill, the MEGA Act, makes sure that there are core principles in place to reinstall Americans' confidence in our elections, with the end goal being, and we have seen this, as people have more confidence that their elections are being run fairly, that more people are likely to participate, which is a good thing for our democracy.
So the way that what the Democrats wanted to do and what you do works, the Constitution gives the states control over elections. That's clear. But Congress can set the parameters for how its members are selected. So basically, it's a mandate. You say, you have to conduct your elections this way for federal offices, and then that just affects everything that the state does, because it's from a cost perspective and everything else. It's just easier to comply with one thing. Why? So talk about the ranked choice part of it. If some states want to have ranked choice primaries because they think it will give them better candidates, and there's some evidence that that works, why is it in the interest of the federal government to tell states how their primary elections should be run?
Let's take that one in particular. It causes a lot of confusion. And that type of confusion inside this election and the diversity of ways that this is being run causes confusion and hurts Americans' confidence in our elections. The core principle of the MEGA Act and the reforms that we're trying to make is to instill confidence in our election system. Having a baseline mechanism to operate our elections across the United States founded in core common sense principles, I think will actually dramatically increase Americans' confidence in our elections.
And as a practical political consideration, I watched Democrats 5 years ago when they had their alternate universe version of this, where they wanted to do all the stuff they wanted to do. Democracy on the ballot was a loser for Democrats, right? When they talked about that and they said, democracy is on the ballot, we're going to do this, voters said, we don't care. Basically the message. Why is that different? Why do you think that will be different for Republicans in 2026 when it didn't work for Democrats before?
I think Democrats are trying to weaken voter integrity, and that is not popular. Legislation that we have is popular because it's common sense. If we go and ask folks whether or not you should have a photo identification to vote, it's overwhelmingly popular because it makes sense and it's regular in their actual personal life. If I go home and buy a six-pack of beer, I get asked for my ID. I want to board an airline, need an ID. Want to open a bank account, need an ID. I think it's common sense for the American people to recognize that if you want to go and vote in an election in the United States of America, you should have a photo ID.
Does your legislation provide funds so that people who are indigent, for poor people to pay for their ID, so that it rebuts the idea of it being a poll tax?
Every state implements this in their own mechanism. My home state of Wisconsin, when we implemented photo identification, we did just that.
Right.
If there's an individual that doesn't have an ID, there 100% needs to be a mechanism for that person to get an ID without a charge. We want to make sure that more people are voting, not less. And I think instilling this confidence will actually result in more people coming to the polls.
Okay, one of the other things that's changed, and this is over the past 20 years, is that the two parties have sort of switched electorates. And 20 years ago, Democrats were very reliant on lower propensity, lower turnout voters, right? And when Republicans said we need to tighten restrictions here, we need to make it harder for cheating, also there are consequences of making it harder to vote. Now the Republican Party is the one that is very reliant on lower propensity voters, and Democrats have the college graduate and the high propensity voters. Is there a concern that as Republicans focus so much on these restrictions, which I understand why it's popular with a lot of diehard Republicans, are you guys shooting yourselves in the foot if you make it more difficult to vote?
I would actually disagree with your premise.
Okay.
I don't think it does make it more difficult to vote, but let's look at the empirical data. The Democrats made similar arguments when the state of Georgia implemented voter integrity legislation.
Right.
We saw President Biden at that time call it Jim Crow 2.0. He would ultimately get called out for making false statements about the legislation. Georgia's run two major statewide elections.
Yeah.
And voter participation in Georgia did not plummet as the Democrats demagogued. What we actually saw was significant high participation continuing in the state of Georgia. The University of Georgia, or Georgia State, ran a massive survey to determine how did people experience the election in the state of Georgia. Overwhelmingly, the operations of the election were popular, and it's really important that that's true across all key demographic groups. And statistically, the survey found that 0% of blacks had a poor, negative experience voting. That's really important. That's a good thing. And ultimately, what we see is people participating because they have confidence the elections are being run fairly and accurately.
Are you worried that if you exert this federal control over state elections, that when Democrats get the ball back at whatever point they get the ball back in the future, that they'll use this to say, oh yeah, now we're going to do the old flipperoo?
No, because the principles that we're putting forward are common sense principles. Again, gutting photo ID is not popular. As you noted, the Democrats didn't win points for coming forward with ridiculous legislation. Our legislation is built on common sense principles that the American people support. I think once this legislation is put in place, it won't be removed for a whole host of reasons, but in particular, the American people will be proud that we have this in place and won't want to see it removed.
All right, we'll see, as the president would say, we'll see what happens. Okay, if you knew that it was Chief Bigfoot and not Sasquatch Bigfoot in Bigfoot Prairie, Wisconsin, you would know him already. But if you don't, here he is, Mr. Chairman, Bryan Steil. Thanks for being with us.